Good morning and welcome to our UBC Learning Circle Trauma-Informed Healing-Centered Community Wellness, Indigenized Approaches to Embodiment and Contemplative Practices with Dr. Jessica Barudin. Today's conversation is presented in partnership with the Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health. We'd like to thank the First Nations Health Authority for generously funding the UBC Learning Circle and allowing us to have these conversations. Before we formally begin, I'd like to acknowledge with respect and gratitude that I'm joining you from the unceded territories of the Musqueam people. And please introduce yourself in the chat box. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Saran Squawkin. I'm Syilx Okanagan on my mother's side and Hickory Apache and Belgian on my father's side. I will be the moderator for today's discussion, and working behind the scenes is our production coordinator, Cynthia, and Kira, our program assistant. They'll be in the background interacting with everyone in the chat. Finally, before we get into today's discussion, I'll provide a gentle heads up that the topics covered may be sensitive or emotionally triggering. Please make sure that you're looking after yourself, and if you need to talk to an elder, friend, counselor, or family member, don't hesitate to do so. Now I'll pass it over to Jessica to introduce herself.
We can share the slides. I think I'm going to start from there. That's okay. Okay, so thank you so much, Serene, for having me, and Cynthia for all of your hard work and the good work you do here with the UBC Learning Circle. I'm really grateful to be invited and to share a little bit with what I've learned, what I've experienced with all the people who are joining in live and who will be listening to this recording. So I wanted to start off just by acknowledging and going into a little bit more detail of what Serene just mentioned with taking care of yourself. And just wanted to start by saying it's really important that we take care of our spirit, take care of our emotions and our body. So I wanted to give a activation awareness. So rather than saying trigger warning, I'd like to just bring light to some of the topics or some of the words or stories that might be shared can bring some activation in our body, which can come in the form of feeling constriction or tense, some tension. And what I'd like you to do is just work with that and be mindful and aware of what's coming up for you in your body and your experiences. And I'll elaborate a little bit more about ways that we can work with this. And that's sort of the theme of today. So I wanted to give a bit of an overview of what to expect for all of you online. So the first part, I'm going to share a bit more of who I am. We talked a bit about the activation awareness, and we're going to do a bit of a grounding and meditation practice as well. The second part, I'm going to talk a bit more about trauma and putting trauma into context. And then I'm going to share a breathwork practice. And the final part that I'd like to share with you today is talking a bit more about healing-centered approaches and ways that we can be grounded in the work that we're doing in community. And then there's a closing writing practice. So for today, just to give you a heads up, it's meant to be interactive and experiential. So if you have a journal or some paper and a pen nearby, maybe take a moment to grab that. It's also, you're welcome to be walking or doing whatever it is that you're doing with your day. Right now, you might be busy. But with this content, it helps to sometimes keep your hands and your body moving. And, you know, some people like to bead or do other things to keep themselves while they're actively listening and engaging as well. So that's where the writing will come in, and I'll introduce some of that as a practice towards the end. And then finally, we'll get into a bit more of a dialogue and have time for a question and answer, and then close up the session. So that's my plan for today. And I'll just take a moment to introduce myself before we get into our practice and cover a few more things in the grounding. So for those of you who I've never met before, I'll introduce myself in Kwakwaka'wakw. So Kaila Kastokla, Nuguam Latstutalas, Hetmandligami Jessica, Nuguam Anankwe, Star Woman, Kaiplin lacha Namgis tlu Kwakwaka'wakw tlu Kwakwaka'wakw Kuplin lach Yelis Hetman Sasame Lila tlu Maya Hetman Tlachnanam Vincent. I won't share all of my family ties, but I am Kwakwaka'wakw, a member of the Namgis First Nation and descendant from the Kwakwaka'wakw and the Kwakwaka'wakw nations. So that's of the Kwakwaka'wakw speaking people, and currently live with my family. I have two children. We live in Alert Bay, or Yelis, which is northern Vancouver Island, and have a busy life up there, and recently started as an assistant professor at UBC. So that's been a new chapter, and how I'd like to share the work that I do is I'm a community wellness practitioner and a communal scholar. So really keeping myself grounded in my home community with my relatives, with my people, and doing work from there and wherever I'm invited to come and to share. So I want to share a bit about the story of my name. And I was given the name Star Woman at my first year of Sundance ceremony at Chippewa at the Thames Sundance Lodge. And that name has been really special to me, and it's been very, very much a learning over the years. And that's what the elder who gave me the name, Carol Thomas, had expressed, that this name's going to continue to teach you and to guide you. And it was a few years ago, or a couple of years ago, when I was doing a fast with some of the New Channel elders on the West Coast, and I became a lot more aware of what the spirit name meant to me, and meant to my life and for who I am. And it continues to make more and more sense of my journey. And so when I'm sharing today, I'm sharing from a very humble place and recognizing that all of you come with many gifts and a lot of knowledge and lived experience. And I'll share a bit of that, what I've learned. And so Star Woman to me represents that light in the darkness. And also what I've made sense more recently is that myself as who I am is part of a bigger constellation of women and teachers and people. So working together in that synergistic way. So that's a little bit more about me and who I am, and I'll share a bit more story as we continue on. So I just wanted to invite you, because I know there's many of you online who are, I would love to hear more about you and Serene as well. So if you'd like to either put it in the chat or use your journal or something to write this down, I'd like you to take a moment to reflect on what are you bringing to this space, to this virtual space, to this time that we have together. And also, what would you like to learn or receive from this time that we have together? So give a moment to have some space for you to write that in the chat if you'd like. And maybe I'll put you on the spot if you're okay with it. What are you bringing to the space?
I think just like an open mind, like I'm open to hearing your story, and then also any of the things that you're going to share with us, and then probably a little bit of anxiety.
Yeah.
But I'm going to try and leave that one. So.
That's good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what would you like to learn or receive?
I think I would like to learn and receive different like grounding techniques that you may have like to share, and then just learning more about your story and whatnot, and how you're doing like great work within your community and also here at the university and whatnot. So yeah.
Great. Thanks, Rain.
Mhm.
We talked a little bit before about how we were both feeling a little nervous. So I said, okay, well, we'll get started and I'll help to ground us with some breathing or some exercise. So we'll get into that. So thank you for those of you who participated in the chat. I look forward to reading those. So again, just getting back to a practice, an invitational practice for you. I mentioned you can have a journal, a piece of paper nearby. And so as I'm sharing and speaking, you can take notes, but really what this practice that I'm hoping that you'll get out of is sort of this energetic or this soul scribing, and you can write out what's coming up or what you're feeling or different things that you're noticing, or maybe some key words that I'm saying or phrases or quotes that you'd like to capture. So that's a practice. For me, it helps to keep my mind, my body, my spirit engaged, and just encourage you to do that as well as we're interacting virtually, and it just helps to deepen a bit of your connection to yourself, to your consciousness, and your experience. So that's the invitation, is to write, to soul scribe. And another practice that is really helpful to carry with you. And again, anything that I'm sharing, feel free to take it or leave it, but practice it and see how it feels for you. The main thing that I'd like you to be just sensitive or attuned to is noticing what you're feeling within your physical body, for one. Maybe noticing what's coming up with your breath. So just take a few breaths or a few moments just to do a quick scan of how you're feeling in your body and what the sensations are in your physical body right now. Even how the quality of your breath is at this moment. And I learned this from a somatic therapist, and it's been really helpful for me. And it's what she described it as the SIFT method, and this sort of sifting through these emotions and things that come up. And we can do this throughout our day. But for these experiences where we're going to talk a bit more about embodiment or spiritual practices or grounding and meditation, when we experience them, I'll invite you to take on this sifting process of it's an acronym. So the S is sensing. So what are things that you're sensing, that you're feeling, that you're maybe hearing? So everything that comes through your senses, that sense of touch, and maybe there's some smell or different things that come through. The next is images, for the I. So are there images that are associated with some of the practices or things that come up? Maybe you're having a flash of a memory or a face of a loved one. And the next is feelings. So what are those feelings that are coming up? And maybe they're really raw, or maybe they are joyful, or something that is familiar. Maybe they're really new feelings that we haven't experienced a lot of. And then finally, what are the thoughts that are associated with that? So sometimes we might have these emotions, and then we might have judgments or associations or things where we start to tell a bit of a story that comes up with some of those feelings. So there's no right or wrong. It's just kind of working through, and it's almost like deconstructing a bit of our experience so that we can put it back together and make some more sense of it in a way. So again, that's the invitation. What we're going to get into is we're going to talk a bit about what I'll share is a few different concepts that I've been exploring, and we'll get into a brief meditation, and we'll move forward into the sort of more educational part that I wanted to talk about. Yeah, so the first thing I wanted to touch on, and I had a nice dinner with my sister Raven last night, and we were talking about this as I was just preparing, what I wanted to say, and who my words were focused on or intended to meet. And I know there's a lot of healers, a lot of health professionals and helpers that are tuning in, and a lot of the people I work with are service providers, people in community who are constantly doing the work to support people in community, oftentimes through crisis and through hard times, but also in ceremonies and in preparation. And so there's a lot of this work is creating a shared sense of community and connection where we can have common language and where we can have understandings of ways how we can communicate what this work is and what these experiences are like, because sometimes it can be really isolating, and spiritual practices or spiritual paths can sometimes feel really lonely is not the right word, but isolating can sometimes be that way. Not all of us have spiritual communities and ceremonial communities that we can easily access. And so a lot of this comes with us being accountable to ourselves and accountable to doing our own work. And that can take many forms, many methods, many modalities. For myself, I explore a lot of different ways of taking care of myself and my all the things that I've experienced, some of the things that I still carry that are heavy, and that can take place through therapy, and I have no stigma or shame around sharing that I've been in therapy for many years and benefited from having a very loving and supportive therapeutic relationship to even just process and talk through some of the things that are coming up on a daily basis or weekly basis within my family, within my mind, within my, the larger community and social context, and other ceremonies and other rituals and just connection to family and place. So your work may look different from mine, but what I'm hoping to express here is that there's a surface level of what we see and maybe what we share, but really that deeper work is very much unseen and very sacred and very personal and intimate to your life and your experience. And we don't always have to put that out and share that with the world. That's really between you and your connection to source, to creator, to whatever spiritual higher power you may or may not believe in. That's very much your own thing to hold and to nurture and to care for. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. What I've been exploring with, and I kind of came up with this when I was working on my doctorate, and it didn't go too far. I didn't actually write about it in my thesis, but it's sort of like a concept that I was playing with as I was really deep in the woods of going through writing and then the research. And it was a really intense process. But I'm sure many of you, and yourself included, have heard two-eyed seeing and familiar with how that's used in many different settings, especially healthcare, especially in academia. We're really familiar and love this concept of really seeing that not necessarily binary, but equality and equal importance of our knowledge systems of Indigenous knowledge, knowing that that is its own and very diverse bodies of knowledge and ways of knowing, and then Western knowledge, which tends to be dominating our institutional and social systems in our society, Western thought and ways of doing things. So this whole approach is really about getting into thinking about having those two sides, so a bit of that duality, as well as taking a bit of a step back or refocusing into our consciousness and hopefully elevating our consciousness a little bit more. And that's what these practices really are about. It's not just about staying stuck in our making sense of maybe the mind stuff that's coming up, the fluctuations of emotions or trauma in particular, but we are using these practices to help to elevate us to a higher level of consciousness and to find ways to liberate ourselves and our bodies. And so the image comes from the chakra system, which is from the yogic tradition, and it represents Ajna, or the sixth chakra, also known as the third eye chakra. So in our third eye, energetically, it's between our eyebrows in the center of our head. And so just parallel to our eyebrows here, even within that anatomical place within our brain is our pineal gland, which again, the chakras are more energetic systems. So you can think of it like an energy wheel of connection that's inward and outwards. It's sort of this spiraling. And so this center is connect to our perception, it's connect to awareness and our spiritual communication. It's also associated with our sense of intuition and imagination. And so, as I share some of these things, it's again just creating a bit more of a container and more shared language where we can talk about consciousness, and it's not necessarily woo woo or sort of outside the box. This is something that I believe all of our ancestors and our Indigenous knowledge systems and spiritual systems have deeply embedded ways of exploring that higher level of consciousness. And only in the last recent hundreds of years, I feel that we've probably lost a lot of that connection and that ability. And even it physically happens in our own body over time as a calcification of that pineal gland. So there's a lot nowadays and how we're seeing these ways of centering these higher levels of consciousness. You know, a lot of people probably have heard of it through plant medicine ceremonies and activating the center. That's where, you know, ayahuasca is often talked about because that DMT is very much associated with activating the pineal gland. But again, this is just gives a bit of a framework. I'm an academic. I'm a secret academic, so frameworks are helpful for my brain. So I'll invite you to start with a practice to get grounded. Hopefully, you're feeling a bit less anxious and more comfortable in the space. I'm feeling definitely a bit better, but I'll invite all of you at home or wherever you are to find a comfortable place. And this can be seated or it can be standing. If you're outdoors, just taking in all the elements. And what I wanted to share with this practice is to start off is just getting into our body. And so for any of you who are looking at the screen, may be big fans of res dogs or reservation dogs as well. This is one of the classic scenes of, I think, the second season where Willie Jack was to visit her sister or her cousin who's in prison, and her Lily Gladstone's a character, and she really gets into this. She has these really deep gifts, you can tell. And so she helps her channel this connection to her ancestors. And so I just wanted to bring that into maybe our SIFT method of just thinking of some images, but make this your own. And for those of you who are really not familiar with reservation dogs, no problem at all. I'll just be guiding a little bit of this practice. And so first we want to focus on getting into just our physical body. And sometimes that's really challenging for us. Sometimes it is easier for me on some days than others. But what I'll invite you to do is just to take your hands and we'll just start to roll our wrists a little bit. Our hands are very sacred and very much have thousands of innervations of nerves, so rolling it in both directions. And just starting to move your shoulders a little bit, inviting some space there, and allowing any tension in your neck to just drop. And then just shaking your hands out a little bit. So just letting the wrists be soft and allowing some movement, maybe even forward and back and side to side. And then just closing your fingers, squeezing your fingers and hands together, and just allowing some opening there. And what we'll do is we'll just take a moment, we'll just take the next minute to really study our hands and study every crease and every line and really pay attention to maybe you're looking at it for the first time in this way and tracing your fingertips and looking at that beautiful, intricate design of your skin, the texture, the colors, without any judgment, just noticing and being present in your body and noticing your hands. And take a deep breath in through the nose and big sigh out of the mouth. We'll do two more just like that. So deep breath in through the nose. And big sigh. Last one, nice full deep breath in through the nose. And big sigh, letting it out. And you can close your eyes and maybe just bring your hands together and start to rub your beautiful hands, creating some friction, creating some heat. And start to increase the speed a little bit more. And just 10 more seconds of creating this connection, some pressure, some friction. Taking some deep breaths as you're doing it, filling up your belly. And then slowly just separating your hands. You can keep your eyes closed or gently open, but feeling that space, that energy in between your fingertips and between your palms. And seeing how with your mind, you can expand that energy. And with your breath, maybe you can inhale and expand and open your hands a little bit more. And with your exhale, you can contract and bring your hands a little bit closer together. Inhaling and exhaling. Two more at your own pace, just breathing in. When that feels complete, just bringing your hands back together one more time. Placing your hands, one hand on your heart, one hand on your belly, and taking up space with your shoulders, lengthening through your spine, and bringing your chin parallel to the floor and sitting with pride as if you had 10,000 ancestors sitting behind you or standing behind you. Taking some deep breaths into your beautiful body, into your spirit. With every exhale, maybe softening any tension or any constriction. One more time, just bringing your hands together, creating some more tension or friction, some warmth, building that energy, breathing in through your nose. Exhaling, releasing through your mouth. One more time, breathing in through your nose. Exhaling, release. And this time, bringing your left hand just between your eyebrows and your right hand, just at the back of your skull. With some gentle pressure, just cradling your head. Breathing into the shape, expanding your arms, expanding your elbows, opening through your chest, through your heart, through your collarbones. Take a deep breath in all the way to the top of your head. Taking some deep cleansing breaths here. allowing that energy, that healing energy of your own hands, of your medicine, to help awaken that third eye center. If you're imagining a light, be some gentle flow of water or energy that's helping to just scour away or rinse away any residue, any resistance, and just allowing for whatever opening you're prepared for in this space. Deep breath in through the nose. And big sigh. One more time, bring your hands together. And placing your palms facing up towards the sky. Relaxing your shoulders away from your ears. Two more cleansing breaths. So deep inhale through your nose. And a big audible sigh. Any stress, any heaviness, just let it go. Deep inhale, last one. And a big sigh. Any doubts or fear, anxiety, handing it over to your ancestors, to the land, someone who can carry it, because you don't need to carry it now. And I love to close my daily practice with a teaching where one of my elders, Levi Martin, has shared with me, and that he says in his language, but I'll share it in English, is he says, "May all good things flow towards me." So say it in your mind or say it out loud. May all good things flow towards me. Two more times. May all good things flow towards me. May all good things flow towards me. And so it is. Gently releasing your hands and doing any stretches and softly opening your eyes. And just coming back into whatever space you're in. It's always nice to take a quick scan. So I like to look over one shoulder and then scale my eyes back over to the other side. And then you're just recalibrating yourself to your physical space and just checking in again that you're in a safe space, whether you're outside or indoors. So I'll just invite you to take a moment and see how maybe using that SIFT method, and you can use your pen and paper, or you can use a chat if you'd like to share with everyone. What are some things that you sensed, or images, or things that some feelings that came up, or thoughts? And yeah, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you feel like sharing, you're welcome to reflect on anything that, yeah.
I feel a lot more calmer, which is nice. Don't really feel anxious anymore, and like a sense of peace. You know, I feel like I haven't like grounded myself in a while. And yeah, it's nice. I know when I usually go traveling, my mom usually says to call my spirit back, and I haven't been doing that. So my spirit's probably all over the place, but that felt like that I was like here right now with you, you know?
Yeah, your mom's, she sounds sweet. Call your spirit back. Yeah, it's important to do that, especially when we're traveling and going to other lands. Oh, well, thank you for practicing with me, and thanks for sharing, and for everyone online who was able to partake. I appreciate that. Let's make sure I'm on track. So we're going to talk a little bit about trauma and putting it into context. And I think it's important that communities, we learn about this, but we don't stay necessarily stuck in and steeped in trauma. What I find is helpful to a degree, but maybe empowering for some people, is to learn about trauma and trauma theory and understanding the impacts that trauma has on our body. But oftentimes I find that we get fearful of what it is. And trauma really is an experience that happens to our body that often leaves us powerless and without choice. And it's more that response or that memory of a traumatic experience that we live and deal with. And so that's where healing and ceremony helps us to move through some of this trauma. So we're going to talk a bit about trauma in context as well, especially with a focus on our Indigenous people. So I've been really loving the work of Resmaa Menakem lately, and Resmaa Menakem is the author of My Grandmother's Hands and has written a number of other books. He's a trauma specialist, and he's talked about many things trauma related. So he's been really big inspiration for me lately. And this quote always stands out for me. And I think it's so true for our communities and our people to remember this and to really embrace it, because oftentimes we're really dismissive and just think that's how things are, and maybe attribute certain qualities to people. But when we think about trauma in a bigger sense, and we have to keep in mind the last 400 or 500 years or more since contact, and how this has had ripple effects on our people. And so the quote goes, "Trauma decontextualized in a person looks like personality. Trauma decontextualized in a family looks like family traits. And trauma decontextualized in people looks like culture." And so just thinking about that a little bit, and many of the stereotypes that we have to endure as Indigenous peoples because of this trauma that's not contextualized, and these hundreds of years of a legacy, painful experience. And what we have to keep in mind is that presently, I believe the Indigenous population in Canada is about 4%. And that is just insane. If you think about, we represent 4% of the population, when pre-contact, we had millions of people in thriving civilizations and tribes all over North America. And that just to say is that we've been through a lot over our collective history over the recent times. And so just talking a bit more about colonization in particular, I think our people have always been resilient, and human beings in general. We've lived for, more than 100, I don't know exactly how many, I think it's about 200,000 years that we've had human beings on this planet. But for our oral history, and I know for our Kwakwaka'wakw history, we go back and we talk about flood stories, and that history traces back to about 14,000 years or so. So colonization is just within about a blink of an eye, really, in the last few hundred years. And since Canada has been established as a nation or settler state, just under 200 years. So we think about this colonial trauma and the impact it's had on our people. There's been genocide and disease. There's been many different types of abuses. We've had our spirituality and our ceremonies attacked. We've had to endure some of our relatives and loved ones experience residential school or day school, other imprisonment and violence, and the governance systems, legislation. It really goes on. And I'm sure the people who are on this webinar have very good knowledge or good baseline understanding of this history and what it means for our people. And really it creates this legacy, this impact, and this loss of personal and collective agency. It has these negative effects on our sense of safety. It has socioeconomic and political consequences, and internal consequences on ourselves and behaviors and different resources. But really what I want to highlight is what this happens to us on our bodies and our physical experiences, and how that happens on an individual and collective level is important to put that trauma in context. And I think the main overarching things that have stood out to me learning more about colonization as a source of trauma is that it is complex, It's compounding and chronic, and it often carries on intergenerationally. And these sort of colonial rules that came forward is really ingrained in our bodies and our psyche to not to trust and not to speak about what we're feeling, and not to feel these emotions. So to me, the antidote is really building a container to hold ways where we can build trust, our own internal trust, and trust in relationship with others, maybe within our family, within our communities, and with the broader society, and finding ways where we can speak about our experiences that come from a truthful or an empowered place, and also safe spaces where we can feel and we can express that, whether that's internally or we're sharing that with loved ones. And so, again, just wanted to also share that decolonization is really about bringing and repatriating and rematriating our land back to Indigenous stewards. And it's not a metaphor. So I'm very careful with not using decolonization very often in the work that I share, and explicit more with the writing. But there is some truth to decolonizing our mind. And I think that's what I'll talk about it a little bit more, is what it means to start with that. That process starts with our bodies and it starts with our mind, similar to all of our medicines. So again, and I share this Resma Menakem quote a lot. I'm just fangirling over him today. But this one is nice for me to share because it comes with this story and this context of where I'm at as a mother. I have two daughters, and very, very much dedicated to them and their well-being and their education, and trying to give them a lot of things that maybe I haven't experienced, that sense of safety or connection through a caregiver, that reliability. I'm still working on it. There's still things. I'm not perfect by a long shot, but they are my teachers, and we keep each other really strong, and they keep me accountable to my healing journey for sure. So they often come with me when I go in the ocean or when I go do some of my own cleansing, and they've been in ceremonies with us since they were newborns. And so this was after one Christmas, just on a Boxing Day, and I was feeling a lot of heavy emotion, really feeling the grief after my mom had passed. And they came and shared with me, and stood by me. And this was during the pandemic, actually. So I always like to share about this experience because at that time I was, feeling really down, but I asked my daughter, I said, can you sing for me, Maya? Like, sing for me while I go in the water, and just, sing for me, pray for me. And I'm going to be praying for you and praying for grandma and all these things. I was trying to explain to her so that they were part of the process as well. And Maya is my oldest, and at the time, I think she was sort of just feeling put on the spot or nervous, but she couldn't really think of a song other than Christmas carols. So she started singing Christmas carols as I went in the water. And I mean, it's all about intention. So it was really sweet. And, she's singing like rocking around the Christmas tree as I'm going in and praying and having my moment. And, that's where the humor kind of came in. But it was nice to kind of come to that place and have a teaching moment too, and realize like, okay, well, we've got to work on learning our healing songs together, and for her to start that process as well. And so they're fortunate they live in our community, and also have a lot of exposure to our traditional songs and our language. So now I think she's a bit more equipped if I were to put her on the spot. But getting back to the quote is by Resma Menakem, is once metabolized and resolved, trauma that has been healed has the potential to support growth and positive change, which can be transmitted across generations. So we know these experiences, that these practices, they're important, and they're not just important for ourselves as individuals, but for our future ancestors, for our children, our grandchildren, great grandchildren, and so on and so forth. Or maybe if we don't have kids of our own, other people in our lives. We have that effect that is just like a drop of water, those ripple effects have on other people. And how beneficial it is when we take care of ourselves and take care of our spirit. And so we'll talk a bit more about reclaiming the body and what that means. And I'm going to just share a bit of some, not like 101, and I put principles in brackets here because really there's a lot of ways. There's not even a clear definition on what trauma informed really means. I think, again, we put it into context. And what does it mean for our people? What does it mean for the person sitting in front of you or sitting in your class or sitting, at your dinner table? How do we really use these values or ways of relating? So I keep that in mind, is that this work is relational. And so some ways that we can be supportive in this is having a non-judgmental presence and creating a sense of safety, creating an opportunity or a container where people can feel empowered in your presence, or at least they feel supported by you. Oftentimes, if we're in a classroom type of setting, it helps to, when we're teaching or leading something, to give clear directions or choices. So often we call these A or B choices. So instead of offering, 3 or 4 or 5 different things that people could be doing with their bodies or with their, attention, that we want to be a bit more clear and direct and say, you could do this or this, and knowing that that's all optional as well. Having some predictability and structure is always important, but being fluid and flexible for change as well. We're really aiming to create in classes where whether we're teaching yoga or we're in ceremony or we're learning together or in circle, it's all about having these authentic connection points or creating authentic experiences. And we're really not requiring perfection. We're not requiring the perfect words or the perfect way of doing things or showing up. It's just really showing up how you are. And so there's a lot of ways that we can do this. And again, I'm speaking mostly to people who are likely teaching or facilitating in community spaces, or maybe you work with people, but ways that we can use our body and use our energy and presence and our voice to create the sense of safety, to create a sense of connection. And oftentimes that's really focusing on our own present moment experience. So being attuned and being in our own bodies and being aware and mindful of our experience in this present moment. We want to encourage people to also make choices for themselves, because most people are adults, even children. We want them to learn how to make choices. So, for instance, if you are teaching a class, just giving that opportunity for Indigenous folks. Again, we're focusing on Indigenous communities here, but to have that, strengthening that repetition of making choices on their own terms. It's really empowering when you give people that autonomy to take care of yourself. If you need to leave the room, if you need to go get some fresh air or get a bite to eat or whatever it might be, but they have autonomy and choice, because again, going back to the collective impacts, that was removed, that sense of agency has been taken away in some sense. And so it's also really important that we learn individually how to create our own rhythms and be attuned to those rhythms, and then be attuned to maybe the rhythm within our group as well. Keeping the space or container spacious. So that means that we're not necessarily filling it with our voice and having to fill it with responses or ideas, but allowing for some silence as well, being comfortable with that. As a facilitator, again, being very clear and coming from an authentic place. So I think what rings true for most people that I've had the honor of guiding is being authentic and true to my story without being maybe oversharing, but being vulnerable where people see that there's a humanity and there's not, you're not elevating yourself to say that you know any better than the next person, because honestly, I don't. I struggle every day with different choices and decisions and patterns and things that come up in my life. So again, just being very authentic and clear about that and who you are and bringing your gifts in that way. There's a lot of ways that we can use our voice and that vibration of our voice through and again, this is a skill that can be learned and practiced, but how do we pace our voice? How do we adjust our volume in the space and our cadence and having this rhythm to the way that we're talking about things that maybe isn't monotone and melodramatic or anything like that, but where we're using our voice as this tool to connect with other people and finding a way where we can often, accentuate our voice and talk more or really emphasize things, or soften our voice and bring it in and bring that calmness in. I find that this has been really helpful for people to feel a sense of safety when they come into spaces where I'm maybe leading movement or breath work or other things. And I think that singing and chanting, if this is something that you're comfortable with offering and sharing, depending on the context, is a beautiful gift. And I always love to share that or to learn or teach any songs that I might know with women who I work with or other community members. And I think that's just such a gift of spirit and the vibration really is powerful. And again, we don't need to be great singers. I've had experiences where maybe not the best singer in the world has sang a song and it's brought me to tears or I've had an emotional reaction and maybe thought about someone in my life or a memory that I hadn't for so long. So that singing, that chanting, those vibrations can help us unlock things with the people that we're with. So I'm kind of giving the context of like when we're in group and in session, but these can also take place with your child or with your significant other or your family member or alone. So again, just making it your own experience and make it work for you and your life and what you offer. And talk about healing centered. So again, we're not necessarily always thinking trauma informed because that keeps things very centered on the trauma, where we might want to be more, wellness informed or healing centered or talking about things that empowers our language a little bit more and how we approach things. And one thing one of my elders, Joe Johnson, had shared with me, he's passed on, but it always stuck with me and my husband. And it was just knowing that we don't know what healing looks like. We don't know what it looks like for the next person. We don't know what's going on in their lives. And again, it kind of goes back to that metaphor from the start of my presentation with the iceberg. It's like there's so much unseen, there's so much that we don't know. And there's endless ways to spirit and to creation. And that sense of spiritual connection. So again, not being dogmatic in how I approach this, but these are just some things that have worked in creating safe containers and healing centered containers with other people, and really promoting that spiritual connection in a non-dogmatic way, not being prescriptive about what people should or shouldn't think or believe in. We all come with our own unique family backgrounds and faith, and that is very sacred to me. Being welcoming and being really intentional, it goes a long way, especially if you have a plan and it kind of goes out the window. As long as you have an intention, that really helps. And setting a collective opportunity for people to set their own intention and to bring that into the space as well. Everything can be ceremonial, depends on that intention, and how can we bring in ceremony and ritual and ways of being and doing that are putting that spirit and that healing intention forward. Again, safety and connection is always important. So how do we keep our space safe energetically and spiritually and emotionally and physically and all of that? Focusing on experiential. So often people won't necessarily remember everything that I've said or shared from these slides, for instance, but you'll remember how you felt. And I think when we focus on how do we want people to feel in our space, in our presence, in our classes, and trying to lead from there and doing our best to be grounded to those values, that sense of holding space. I think being slow and gentle goes a long way. When we think about our elders and our teachers, what kind of presence do they have? Often healing isn't abrupt and rough and forceful and all of that. It's very much on the other side, like more of like a embrace or feeling close and connected to our teachers. Again, a big one that I've been learning and often struggling with is creating space and time for deep rest and embedding that within some of the facilitation work that I do. Is that people need to rest a lot more than we give ourselves opportunity to, and integration being a little bit different where I used to facilitate a class to young teenage girls in care in a residential facility, and it was so challenging on my spirit. I remember talking to my therapist about how do I kind of hold all of this? I would leave sometimes feeling pretty helpless and upset. And she said, you got to make sure that after those sessions, go somewhere and sit and just stare out the window and just allow yourself just to process and to give yourself a buffer before you get back into the next thing. Oftentimes we don't give ourselves that grace and that permission to just be alone and just to feel whatever it is that comes up. Because these spaces, when we're in ceremony, we're gathering in circle or we're doing things, there's often a lot of, great connection and laughter, but sometimes there's some very heavy sharing. And maybe people get into things that they've never felt comfortable sharing with another person before. So how do you make space for yourself and for the people that you're with to have a bit of integration where we're coming back to wholeness? And I'll talk a little bit more about this towards the end. The land is always healing. The land is always nourishing us. And so just offering foods and water and opportunities where we can feel nourished. I'm not going to get too in depth onto the nervous system stuff. I think I'm talking a lot and I want to get into a little bit more practice. But when it comes to the nervous system, I think what's important for us to keep in mind is that, we have these different branches from our brain, our spinal cord, our body is very complex with a lot of organs and different systems. And so we have the parasympathetic nervous system and those responses, which often associate with rest and digest, and our sympathetic nervous system, which is often associated with the fight or flight. And I find it took me a while to kind of figure out, but we don't necessarily want to only be in our parasympathetic and try to be calm and everything. They both serve a very important purpose for us to survive in this world, to navigate our day to day. So what we want to cultivate with our practices, our wellness routines, our spiritual practices is this ability to flow easily and have this fluidity or flexibility in our nervous system responses, and where we're not totally charged up in one and we're maybe rewiring some of our sense, because with trauma we get a bit of sometimes distorted signals in our body that leads to other, sometimes chronic health over time when trauma is complex and maybe not addressed. But there's a lot more to say on these topics, and I won't get too much in depth. But what I wanted to talk about again, just to put it into practice, is how we can take care of ourselves. And even if we don't fully understand the science behind how our nervous system works, there's ways where we can make sense of it, maybe from a practice or experiential lens, or from putting into consideration how did our ancestors take care of themselves and have done this for thousands of years. And so there's a lot of different traditions that I draw on. I've been able to practice and learn yoga for, I think, I must be close to 20 years now. I started when I was a teenager, and practiced intensely on and off different periods of my life. And I've learned a great deal from that tradition. It's a spiritual tradition, and often people think it's just about the physical movement, but really there's such a rich tradition of understanding our mind and understanding our energy and a connection to spirit. So I recommend that for people who are maybe new and don't have a lot of connection to their communities and traditional knowledge or teachers. There's so much that we can draw from systems and Indigenous cultures all around the world that have been studying and documenting in different ways how we can cultivate this sense of balance and wellness. And I believe firmly that our traditional knowledge is there, and a lot of these energetic practices have always existed in our nations, and maybe it's still sleeping for some of us, and it's just waiting to wake back up. And that's part of the work that I'm doing, and the research that I'm most interested in is exploring how our language really can teach us and how we can find these concepts and this deep knowledge, this sort of esoteric knowledge that may have been lost through the hundreds of years of colonization. And so, in the meantime, drawing on yoga, which is a beautiful tradition, a beautiful practice, other forms of movement. There's ways when we connect with a loved one, having that intimate conversation and using your face and your voice. And this really connects to our polyvagal nerve. So again, this is one of our cranial nerves that is called our vagus nerve, and it travels and it innervates from our inner ear, our face, different parts of our eyes, all the way through our throat, and it travels down to our internal organs and into our heart, into our stomach and our intestines. So it really, when it does respond, there's ways that it releases different, reactions within our body. So because of that innervation with our face, there's ways where we can kind of balance that vagus nerve and connection with the way that we engage socially with other people. Meditation, which maybe isn't always first off what people are comfortable doing, because sometimes we get too much in our head. But even if it's just a few moments, or starting off with just a few minutes a day or 5 minutes, and building up your ability to sit and just do nothing but pay attention to your breath. And there's endless ways that you can meditate. Humming. So we might integrate this in our next practice as well. Inversions, or kind of having your heart above your head, and laying on your right side, deep, slow belly breaths, having some pressure or some body work on your sacrum. Laughter really helps. Footwork also helps. And then just being in a quiet space, quiet container. There's endless ways to Indigenous healing methods. I've just named a few here. And I welcome you to share in the chat any that you're learning or working with. And some of these include, prayer. I know a lot of people who wake up and that's the first thing they do in the morning. They offer their prayers to the sun. I often do that and associate it with gratitude and just being grateful. And so that's a very nurturing approach, being mindful. Again, we have lots of sacred ceremonies that are still around and still integral to our nations, to our communities. And fasting is still another way, being on the land, gathering medicines, energetic exchange with our living world, drumming, chanting, singing. It's really endless. So I just invite you to share any that I've missed out on this list, and anything that really is nurturing your spirit and helping you on your healing journey. So again, we're going to get into a bit of a breathwork practice, and just wanting to bring awareness, especially for those of you who are working with people who are dealing with trauma or healing from trauma is that often when we get in these activated states or something happens, what happens to our breath? What happens even if we're stressed out? Like for you, how does your breath change when you're feeling anxious or stressed? Do you notice what happens?
I think just like more shallow breaths,
Mhm.
not very like deep and probably just a bit more breaths instead of like longer breaths.
Yeah, that's for sure. So we'll get to the breathwork practice a little bit more, and I just invite you to think about what are some of the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual benefits of breath. But what we'll do is again, coming into a comfortable seated position, we're going to take a couple of minutes just to focus on resonant breathing. And so relaxing your shoulders, and we're going to take a nice deep breath in through the nose and exhale through the mouth. Two more just like that. So deep breath in and exhale, release. Last one, nice full deep breath and release. And this time we're going to inhale for a count of 4 and exhale for a count of 4. So when you're ready, breathing in for 4, 3, 2, 1, and then exhale, releasing 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale, 3, 2, 1. Exhale, 3, 2, 1. Inhale, exhale. And continue. If you like, you can increase the length of your inhales to 6. So breathing in for a count of 6 and exhaling for a count of 6. And the idea here is that we're breathing maybe 10% lighter and slower, and even just 10% more deep into our belly, into our chest. So this is called resonant breathing. So when we breathe in for 6 and exhale for 6, and it has a lot of benefits to our nervous system, to calming our body, our mind down. And if we can breathe through our nose, that brings even more benefits. So breathing in and exhaling through our nose. So just one more minute of finding that resonant breathing. Again, focusing on light, slow, and deep breaths. And for the last 5 or 6 breaths, seeing if you can breathe just even the space outside of your lungs, just around your body. And so coming back to your space, maybe opening your eyes and just again following that method and seeing what came up for you. Sensations, images, feelings, thoughts as you're breathing. And maybe nothing came up, and that's totally normal as well. I just wanted to close with some essential practices. Again, keeping in mind all the many helpers and educators and healers who are part of this work, who maybe have been drawn to the idea of being trauma informed or healing centered. What I wanted to share is a few things, and maybe we'll talk about this a bit more in the chat, but just again, having a lot of time for processing, for integration. I can't stress enough how important spiritual hygiene is. This is a concept I've only been really familiar with in the last 2 years or so, of really making sure to take care of my container and my vessel after facilitating. Oftentimes when we're around different people, and again, it's not saying that any energy or any people are unclean or dirty or anything. It's just that sometimes we can get overwhelmed, and it's important that we come back to our own sense of alignment and a baseline. So that term spiritual hygiene has been helpful for me to recalibrate a bit more. Really build and strengthen your own network. I put that out as a prayer to have a supportive group of healthy women in my life who are also drawn to spirituality and spiritual practices, and that has come full circle. And I've been really blessed to have many loved ones who are my teachers or who have learned from me, or are dear friends or sisters who continue to support me and witness me and keep me accountable. Cite your teachers. So I always, again, maybe it's the academic in me, but I think it's really important in our work that we talk about who our teachers are and who did we learn these practices from, or where did it come from? Where did the songs come from? What's the story with that? And talk about and pay respects and homage to the people who have taught you. So this is something that I've been a lot more intentional about, and sharing who my teachers are and where they're from, and with their permission to do so. And when they've offered me practices and have been able to share that with other people. Yeah, again, just do your own work, manage your energy well. I've been a lot more intentional as well about not trying not to take on too much. I fail at that very often, but yeah, trying to do my own work and find my own rhythms throughout the year, and saying no. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'm sure there's a lot more, and I would love for anyone to offer their essential practices for their loved ones who are deeply involved in community and in helping, in service, and in healing. But I think that's a good place to close. I had a few more slides, but I know I'd like to open it up if there's questions, or if you'd like to talk about anything in particular.
Yeah.
And I'll just share quickly while you're pulling that up.
Yes.
For anyone who is interested in practicing a bit more with me, I'd like to just encourage you to follow me on Instagram. That's where I share a lot of my practices, and links to videos or links to learning materials. It brings you also to my website as well, which is just www.jessicabarudin.com. And yeah, from there, my Instagram is probably a good landing page if you are interested in some more. I have quite a number of videos that offer some gentle practices for people who might be just starting out. So keeping beginners in mind, as well as some other movement practices, and yeah, teach to a variety of community members. So just encourage you to stay connected, to reach out to me. And I'm going to be working over the summer. I have a few grad students, so we're going to be working on some knowledge translation materials. And I'm really excited about that because we're going to explore different ways that we can bring in all of our senses rather than just text only. So I'd love to hear from you if you have any requests for how any material that you'd like to learn. So keep me posted with ideas or videos and different things that we will integrate throughout the summer. So excited to share that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much. Mm-hmm. It was such a great session, and we have tons of great questions. Our first question is, what are some good ways to bring or approach these practices while working with Indigenous populations without being appropriative?
I guess I would want a little bit more context from the person who's asking the question.
They're a settler.
Yeah. Okay. I think that the important thing is to work with the strengths within the communities. So we have a lot of strength in our communities, a lot of people who have this knowledge and have many different types of gifts. So working with the communities to know and identify who are those people. Sometimes it's not always easy, and people don't always want to be recognized in those types of spaces. So readiness is sometimes challenging, but I would, hire Indigenous people, Indigenous facilitators or educators or knowledge keepers to share this rather than trying to take and offer it yourself. I think that's where we really need to empower spaces and opportunities for Indigenous people to offer these practices. So that would be my initial thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And can you share any knowledge about safe spaces and brave spaces, and any experts in the area to learn more?
Yeah, I think they can go hand in hand when we create safe spaces. It often leads to people feeling maybe a bit more equipped or comfortable to share something on their mind. I know I've heard it from, I think Brene Brown might be the person who talks a lot about brave space or things like that. I can't think of other people who use that terminology as much off the top of my head. But I think where we don't want to necessarily sugarcoat things and like just think that, I think, and this was a conversation I was having with my sister as well last night when we were talking a bit about, what I would want to share in this session and just some ideas, but like, who decides if it's a safe space? I think that's where we have to be really mindful is, are we just saying it's a safe space and just putting that out there, but it's really not? I think we have to be intentional and attuned to the people who are in our space. And sometimes we can't control for certain things, certain maybe interpersonal dynamics when we're in a group setting or historical things that come up. But we do our best just to create a container where people are a part of establishing what's our group norm going to be, what are some things that we can agree to in this community space. And I think it comes back to intention and also how do we what can we agree to? For instance, some ones that I always offer that are typical would be confidentiality, being kind and respectful with our listening, with our body. But there's other things where people, I'll open it up right at the beginning and ask people, what can make you feel safer in this space right now in your body? And some people just need, maybe they have a chronic condition where they're in a lot of physical pain that's unseen, and they need to get up and move or do different things with their bodies or other things. Or maybe they have a baby with them. That's another thing where I've tried to really shift my spaces of facilitating where all ages are truly welcome, and that we're making these containers that again are family rooted and welcoming, and bring people from all ages into the space. So I don't know if I can elaborate a lot more on the brave space, but those are some things that I like to integrate with creating a sense of safety and connection.
Definitely. We have another question here. What are some good ways to bring or approach these practices while working? Oh, we read that one. Sorry, I thought we didn't. Can you share any knowledge? I'm reading all the same questions. How do you juggle community research and being a practitioner in community?
Well, I haven't been actively researching very much lately, so I haven't been, immersed in a research process. I've been a lot more involved in just being a community member, and when I'm invited to facilitate, then I offer spaces there. But yeah, it's a good question, and I think for me, it's a lot about trust and moving with the readiness of the people, the community, and the capacity. And also my own readiness. There's certain things that maybe I'm not feeling totally equipped or prepared to do. So seeking out mentorship, and then a lot of space for rest and integration and self-care and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And not being on all the time, that's been a really tough one for me to be kind of unlearning, is like oftentimes because of the different roles that I have, I'm often having to be sort of on, like if that makes sense, of just being able to always be professional and always, sometimes it's nice to just be at home and with my family and being, silly or disorganized or whatever, and not having anyone expecting or needing anything from me. That's a new one that I'm really embracing and enjoying, and try not to be maybe feeling badly when I don't always get to show up for everything, because I think that's a hard part of living and working in community sometimes, is that there's always so much going on. Like there's, a lot of celebrations and ceremonies, and there's been a lot of death lately and funerals and so much happening, and I can't be at everything. So giving myself grace for my own humanity has been probably the best lately.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Our next question is, so being being alone has being gracious with ourselves. What if being alone is scary? Do you have any recommendations?
Can you read it one more time?
Yeah, being alone as being gracious with ourselves. What is being alone? What if being alone is scary? Do you have any recommendations?
I guess sitting with that a bit more is like, what is scary about that, about being alone? Leaning into it a little bit more. I think that we don't have to be alone in this work, and that's a big part of our healing, is healing within a context of relationality and connecting with community, and that's really what we need to get through it. Like, we can't do this work alone per se. But sometimes there is something about being alone to integrate and to get a little bit more comfortable with what that is. And so I would say, for someone who might be struggling with being alone and starting off with some of these contemplative practices, which can kind of bring up more anxiety for some people, when we're just sitting and focusing on, our mind or the quality of our mind or our body even. Sometimes our bodies feel like foreign places, or they don't feel safe. That's a common thing to feel when we've experienced trauma in our bodies. And so giving it time and slow, gradual opportunities just to really give yourself some space and connect with that until it becomes like second nature, and it feels good and it feels comfortable, and maybe even joyful to be alone. But yeah, I think starting off with building that connection to first, that we're social creatures too, that connection to community. So hopefully that helps. But I have heard that from some people, is that, leaning into these spaces of healing and contemplative practices or embodiment and things like that is very anxiety provoking. So that is just wanted to share I think a normal response. Yeah.
And then, how do we address racism and discrimination, not only for our own communities and families, but also for Indigenous nations in a respectful way, like trauma-informed way?
How do we approach
Racism and discrimination, not only for our own community and families, but also for Indigenous nations in a respectful way?
I find that it'd be a difficult question, because I think there's different ways we can approach it individually, and doing our own work when we've maybe experienced racism, whether it's a microaggression or it's something very harmful and maybe violent. We need to have a container, and maybe we need to have a ceremony with our community or loved ones, to help us to let some of that go, because it's a hateful act to hate, like to have racism and that sort of prejudice. So how do we, protect ourselves? I think there's a lot of ways that we can cultivate a sense of safety and protection with different spiritual practices. The one that I shared at the beginning with our hands and that prayer that Levi Martin had shared with me is that may all good things flow towards me. Again, you're asking for all those, and it works. Like that's what we're calling into our life, into our sphere. But for many Indigenous people in society, we're still dealing with a lot of daily acts of harm or violence, whether that's even in the healthcare system. So it's a tough question, and I don't have an easy answer, a simple answer. And I don't think our systems have evolved yet to really address like the hundreds of years of heaviness and grief and pain of this racism that still exists in our society. I think we have a long way to go collectively, but I believe that if more of us were attuned spiritually and connected to our own sense of humanity and spirituality, then we would see and experience a lot less of that harm. Yeah.
Thank you. And this will be our last question. The question is, I've heard some people that breath work isn't accessible or comfortable for some. Is there an alternative to breath focus that can be offered and provide a similar benefit?
Yeah, it's a really good question because breath work is sort of, again, in the wellness industry, I think it's becoming a bit more of a buzzword, and like same with embodiment, for instance. I've been seeing a lot more of that, or somatic, or different things. So we're always going to see trends. Breath is, if we can think about just what breath is and how important it is just for our survival, our breath, it gives us life. So keeping in mind that connection, and then when we start to understand and work with the breath, we can appreciate that breath is really that vehicle, that bridge between our body, our mind, and our spirit. And so it helps us to get into and speak to those, it sort of translates those different layers of our physical sensations, our emotions, and everything that is surrounding just our lived spiritual experience as humans. So I think the same way of saying breath work isn't accessible, it's like, well, I can't do yoga because I'm not flexible. It's sort of the same. There's so many types of and approaches to breathing. And sometimes the most important thing we need to learn first is healthy daily breathing. So that resonant breathing exercise that we did a few moments ago is one of the best ways to start with breath work. And what most people should be doing is, again, focusing on breathing through our nose and slowing our breath, having a bit of a lighter quality to our breath, lighter, slower, and deeper. And that will really transform every system in our body if we can kind of attune to that. And then the other techniques, they'll just give time. And some people have different reactions. There's ways that the breath work can either activate our nervous system or help to slow our nervous system. So again, just like the last question, just get time and gradually moving in and finding a teacher who can help you to really connect with where you're at. And that's where a good teacher will meet you where you're at. And we don't need to jump into things that are flashy or fancy or advanced or anything. It's just even working on the healthy daily breathing will have transformative effects for our health and well-being. So I hope that's helpful, and I hope they aren't, discouraged to try some of that. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much. That was our last question. We are so thankful to everyone who joined us, and thank you so much for sharing so much about the grounding and the breath work, and then also just how we have a trauma-informed and healing-centered approach to wellness and whatnot. And it's been really great. Do you have any last words to share, or?
No, I just want to thank you for your presence and going along with me as well with these practices, and for Cynthia as well for everything to support me being here in this space, and for everyone who's tuned in online, all of my relatives, my family, my loved ones. I really appreciate you for continuously being there for me and supporting. And for people who are still curious to learn a bit more, again, just welcome you to stay connected and to reach out if you'd like. And yeah, just grateful to be here and to be invited. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. So just before we end the webinar, we'd love to bring your attention to our upcoming webinars. We have a few. I won't read them all because there's a lot, but you can check them out at our website at www.learningcircle.ubc.ca. Please sign up for our newsletter. The link will be in the chat. All our webinars are free to sign up for on our website. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We look forward to seeing everyone at our next one. Lim Lim, thank you.